The 2025 NFL Draft is officially less than 2 weeks away, so in today's video, I want to do a predictive mock draft where I take the pick for each team as to what I think the team will actually do on draft night. Subscribe if you're new, let's hop into it. So because this is a predictive mock draft, I will not be doing any trades because it's almost impossible to actually predict what trades happen on draft night. So with that said, at pick number 1, the Tennessee Titans are going to go ahead and get their franchise quarterback of the future. This pick feels like it is the most definitive 100% going to happen pick. If they take anybody not named Cam Ward, it will be a total shock. So we'll take Cam Ward number 1 overall. Good playmaker, good ball skills, good creativity, knows how to get out of the pocket and make some plays. And Tennessee could definitely use that after what's been a pretty disastrous start to Will Levis's career. But hopefully for Will Levis, he can find another place to start and get things rolling, or at the bare minimum, be a solid backup for Cam Ward. Pick number 2 goes to the Cleveland Browns, and this pick feels like it has been gaining momentum. I have been on the Travis Hunter hype train for the Cleveland Browns basically since the get-go. It does feel like things are starting to kind of lean more in the favor of Travis Hunter being the 2nd overall pick, more so than Abdul Carter. So I'll go ahead and take Travis Hunter here. In terms of what he's actually going to play for Cleveland, I think he's probably going to play more of a receiver role for that roster with certain packages on defense at the cornerback position. The defense for the Browns already has a couple of solid cornerbacks, so I don't feel like Travis Hunter's that needed there, but maybe in certain packages, he can definitely be a problem out there and create a lot of havoc plays. And of course, as a receiver, you pair him next to Jerry Jeudy and what they already have there with David Njoku. I like the pick there for the Browns. I still think that they're a whiles away from competing, especially with, not very good quarterback play. All right, then this puts the Giants at a really unique position at pick number 3. Now, because we're not doing trades, I'll just take what I think they would do in this situation. With that said, I would actually say that they are probably now a prime trade down candidate if they are in this spot where Cam and Travis are off the board. And that's just simply because they really don't need a pass rusher like Abdul Carter, but he is so clearly head and tables above the rest of the prospects here as a blue chip guy that I feel like you're almost forced to take Abdul Carter here. So because of that, I'm going to go ahead and just take Abdul Carter and maybe assume that they try to trade away Kayvon Thibodeau later in the draft. Again, I do think the Giants would be at a spot here to trade down. Some teams like, I don't know, the Panthers, the Saints, maybe even the Raiders would all potentially like to move up to pick 3 to take a guy like Abdul Carter. I think those all would make some level of sense. In terms of the player that Abdul Carter is, good size, good length, good flexibility, can get around the corner extremely well, moves very nicely, has a variety of pass rush moves, and you pair him up with Brian Burns, and that's going to be a defensive line that was already pretty good last year, but now is even more better. I mean, especially with Dexter Lawrence up the middle. Again, I think Kayvon Thibodeau is probably out the door if this does happen. All right, the Patriots are on the board here, and I think they're going to likely take an offensive lineman here. I like Ted McMillan, but I think 4 is a little bit too rich, and just based off everything that I've been seeing the Patriots do this offseason and dressing certain receivers like Stephon Diggs, kind of feels like they're going to go ahead and just take an offensive lineman, especially with, of course, Mike Vrabel being the head coach who likes to build the trenches. In terms of who I think they will take, I think it comes down to Will Campbell and Armand Membu, but I just kind of think that Will Campbell is a bit more of that Patriots style offensive lineman, a bit hard-nosed, physical. He's kind of an interesting case study of what you think of Will Campbell, because some people think he's likely to stick inside to play guard, whereas others truly do believe that he can play tackle. I'm kind of the mind that I think he's better suited as a guard if he can fix his stance, because he's really upright in his stance. But if he does play tackle, I do think he is very capable of doing it. He did it at LSU against some really good pass rushers and had a lot of success there. So no matter where they put him at, tackle, guard, center even, I think he'll be successful with that roster and give a lot of flexibility to an offensive line that's just not very good right now. So after we get to the 5th overall pick, I feel like now we're getting to the territory where each pick becomes harder to predict. So I'm going to do my best. Again, I think the top 4 picks are pretty safe. Maybe outside of Will Campbell, maybe Armand Membu becomes the pick here. But the first 3 are very obvious. Once we get to the Jaguars, I do think the board opens up a tad bit here. And that's because I see like 3, maybe 4 players being serious contenders to go 5th overall. And that's, of course, Ted McMillan, paired next to Brian Thomas Jr., Mason Graham, paired up with Eric Armstead, Trayvon Walker, and Josh Hines-Allen. Even Ashton Genty, I think, is also in play. And I think a sneaky one here is Tyler Warren, just because the Jaguars don't have a proven commodity at tight end quite yet. With that said, again, kind of like the Giants, I do think this is a potential trade down spot. I also do want to show a little love. I didn't mention him earlier, but Jade, Will Johnson, I think also could potentially be available here. Ultimately speaking, though, I think that they're probably likely going to stick to the trenches, and I think Mason Graham makes the most sense here. Yes, Ted McMillan would be awesome to pair on the outside with Brian Thomas Jr., but I think you can probably wait to the 4th round to maybe get a Jaden Higgins or Alec Amanor or something along those lines. It's really going to be difficult to find a true disruptor up the middle like Mason Graham in the 2nd round. So even though it's a pretty good defensive interior class, I just kind of feel like they're kind of in a spot where each position they need is pretty deep. And so you're just going to probably pick the best of the positions you need. And I think Mason Graham is likely going to be the pick here. So we'll stick with the trenches. But again, I kind of give you guys the options. It could truly be any of those players. The Jaguars have done a really good job of kind of hiding who they're ultimately going to take. Moving to the Raiders at pick 6, and I feel like this one's already kind of figured out at this point. Like there's really 2, maybe 3 players that I would consider here. If Mason Graham falls to them, I think he could be the pick here, but outside of that, it's either Ted McMillan, Ashton Jeanty, or one of the cornerbacks, and I would probably say Will Johnson just because his ceiling's a little higher than Jade Barron. But I think the pick has to be Ashton Jeanty. He's one of the few blue chip prospects in this year's draft class. I love him as a prospect. Elite contact balance. And this is a Raiders team that just can't go into next year with Sasir McCormick and I believe Raheem Mostert as their running back 1 and 2. That just can't be the case. You have to find an upgrade. Yes, it is a deep running back class, but Ashton Jeanty is on a tier of his own. And then behind him, Amarian Hampton probably gets taken down the board a little later. So if that's the case, I think that if you're the Raiders, you're kind of forced to take the blue chip guy in Ashton Jeanty. Sure, they could also go Shedeur Sanders, who still happens to be on the board, but I don't think that'll be the case here. By the way, in terms of where I think Shedeur actually does land, of course, we'll talk about him later in the draft, but I do think that there will be a team that does trade up at some point to take Shedeur Sanders, whether it is at this certain spot that I'm at now or a little bit later. Just going to throw that out there. I don't think Shedeur actually ends up falling too far because I think a team would likely trade up for him just because there's a lot of quarterback needy teams out there. Moving over to number 7, the New York Jets. I think this kind of has to be an offensive weapon here or an offensive tackle. Kind of a number of different ways I could go here. I could go Ted McMillan to pair on the outside with Garrett Wilson. I could go Tyler Warren to give Justin Fields a legit option in the tight end room. Or I could go Armand Membu to build up that young offensive line and give who will be Justin Fields a legit offensive tackle next to Olu Fashanu. If it was up to me, I think I would probably take Ted McMillan because they just don't have really any serious weapons outside of Garrett Wilson. Not to mention the running game's a little suspect. But if I'm doing a predictive mock draft, because they just got a new head coaches are a little bit more patient sometimes. Obviously, sometimes they cannot be very patient. But I think in the case of Aaron Glenn, I think he's going to play this a little bit smart here and just take Armand Membu to kind of finish up the offensive line. The right tackle spot right now for the Jets is not looking very good. Membu sits in there and fits in perfectly. And I think you could still take a Mason Taylor in round 2 or 3. And like I said earlier about Jaden Higgins or Alec Amanor in rounds 2 to kind of give your offense some more options. I think the tackle class gets pretty weak after like Josh Simmons comes off the board late in the first. So I think you're going to go ahead and just stick with Armand Membu. And this kind of feels like it's the right pick for the Jets to take, especially if you're building towards the long haul. All right, the Carolina Panthers are on the board here, and there's a number of ways that this team could go. They could go Ted McMillan. They could go with a guy like Mike Green. But everything that I've been hearing and reading and seeing has been kind of pointing towards Jalen Walker being the de facto pick here. Mel Kiper, who is an extremely respected NFL draft analysis guy, in every single one of his mock drafts, by the way, I did a reaction to his recent mock draft. I'll have it pinned up towards the end of the video. But he's had Jalen Walker going to the Panthers every single pick here, and it kind of does make some sense. Jalen Walker is what I would call a classic disruptor, a versatile piece who plays multiple positions, can get to the quarterback, can play off-ball linebacker, and the Panthers are in a situation where they could use some pass rush juice, some disruptor, and somebody who can also play off-ball linebacker. So kind of feel like Jalen Walker fixes both those issues, even though I don't love the value of taking Walker at pick 8. I think it does make a level of sense here. So because this is what I've been hearing, and this is not what I would do, we'll take Jalen Walker here, who I think is a fine player, who I think does a lot of really good things, an elite athlete, very flexible, has an incredibly high ceiling, but is going to take some time to develop into becoming the guy he truly can be, especially if the Panthers are going to definitively put him as like an edge rusher or an off-ball linebacker, or have him float around between both. Like he has to refine both of those games, so it'll be quite interesting to see what he does there. All right, at pick 9, the New Orleans Saints, another one of these teams that I think is extremely difficult to actually predict, kind of like the Jaguars. This is a difficult one here because there's just a number of ways they can go on this board here. They could go with Ted McMillan. They could go cornerback to pair up with Kool-Aid McKinstry. They could even go tight end to just go best player available in Tyler Warren. Jahad Campbell makes some sense. Some work on the defensive line all makes sense. Like every single player that I'm looking at here could very well end up being the pick here. So this makes this one very, very difficult to actually figure out what they're going to do here. Because this is an offensive-minded head coach in Kellen Moore, I kind of feel like they're going to lean towards the offensive side of things, especially because they did do some work defensively, bringing in Justin Reed, re-signing Chase Young, and doing a couple moves around the edges there. This is a pretty deep defensive line class, so I think maybe in the second round, they'll go after an edge rusher or interior defensive lineman. And I think they're going to focus on offense here. And I think they're going to go ahead and take Ted McMillan. Obviously, lots of question marks with Chris Olave's health. And I always get his name wrong. And I don't know why I don't do more research on his name when I do these videos. But Rashid Shaheed, I'm sorry. His name is unbelievably difficult for me for whatever reason. Ted McMillan kind of perfectly pairs alongside those two guys. Of course, when they're both healthy. Ted is massive, very long, moves very well, has a good route understanding, understands the nuance, solid hands. The biggest complaint about Ted McMillan is that he's 6'5", but he doesn't play like he's 6'5". Yes, you can win 50-50 balls, but he's more of a possession guy, more of a yak guy, more than somebody who you're going to throw Calvin Johnson like passes to, which again, a lot of people don't like because he's of 6'5". I think he's a great player. I know his 2024 film isn't as good as 2023, but I think that was in some ways due to the injury that he was playing through, as well as the offense for Arizona was just pitiful. So I think the Saints would be smart here to just go ahead and take who I think's probably the best player still on the board there, and Ted McMillan. So I like that pick there. All right, the Chicago Bears are on the board here, and the Chicago Bears have done a very fine job of shoring up this offense and fixing up any issues they may have had on defense. And now they're in a spot at pick 10 where they can truly just go like best player available. And there's a number of ways that I'm looking here on the board. Obviously, Tyler Warren is the one that I'm probably gravitating towards the most, just because he is, in my opinion, probably the best player on the board here, or one of the better players on the board here, especially when you look at how much better he is as a tight end than anyone you could take in the second round. I think safety is pretty deep, so I think you could probably wait till round 2 or maybe even day 3 to address the safety room, even though I personally love Malachi Starks and think he'd be awesome in a Bears uniform. Don't think he'll be the pick here. The only other thing that I'm really considering outside of Tyler Warren would be an edge rusher, and there are a number of edge rushers who I would definitely consider here for this team. Mike Green, if you want a legit, maybe undersized, but legit pass rush ceiling. Donovan Ezeraku for very similar reasons, but he's a little bit stiffer than Mike Green. James Pierce Jr., if you want to bank on what we've seen at points on film, and also being kind of a speedster who can convert power to speed or speed to power, however you want to say it. Michael Williams, if you're banking on upside and pass rush juice, or sorry, run stuff juice, but hopefully you're banking on him becoming a pass rusher, or the unbelievable talent that Shamar Stewart is, who just needs a lot of development. I mean, there's really a number of ways I could go here, but I think if this was actually on the table here, I think Ben Johnson would take Tyler Warren, and I kind of feel like Cole Kmet potentially could be off the team pretty soon. I know that edge rusher might be considered a bigger need, but an offensive-minded coach going to want to build up that offense to his liking. I think running back gets taken probably rounds 2, so I'll take Tyler Warren here for the Chicago Bears, and just completely continues to put the finishing toppings on that team. All right, the San Francisco 49ers are on the board here, and again, kind of like the Saints, there's a lot of different ways the Niners could go. They could go corner in Jahdae Barron or who maybe we could play safety to kind of finish up that secondary. Same thing with Malachi Starks. Could go Jahad Campbell to pair up with Fred Warner. But I think if this was the way the board fell, I think they have to find a pass rusher next to Nick Bosa, because that defensive line is not very good right now. And so that would take me to Mike Green here, who hopefully the off the field stuff has been figured out. I have not looked into that recently, so you guys can tell me in the comments if you have any knowledge of that. But hopefully that stuff does figure its way out. Again, sort of an undersized guy, about 248, who played at Marshall, which is a little bit suspect. But man, 17 sacks, he pops on films, moves incredibly well. And when you have somebody like Nick Bosa opposite of him, I think that puts Mike Green in a situation where he's likely going to be facing up against the opposing offensive tackle, where they can't double team him, they can't put their focus on him, because Nick Bosa is, a 10+ sack a season type of guy. So you pair up Nick Bosa, who can be a finesse guy, but can also, be more of a power guy. And Mike Green could just consistently be more of a finesse guy, a speed guy, somebody who wins just based off how athletic he is. I think that would make that defensive line significantly better. And by the way, I still think interior defensive line is probably a pick they would consider as well in later in the draft. So just kind of keep that in mind. All right, Dallas is up at pick 12, and I truly think the Dallas Cowboys are of two minds. I know everyone wants to mock running back to the Dallas Cowboys, but I have not heard anything from the Cowboys that they're going to take running back, barring Ashton Jeanty being here at pick 12. Then they would probably take him. But it feels pretty safe to say that Jeanty will either go 6 or maybe even 9 or 10 or wherever, right? He's probably going to be off the board by pick 12. But if he is for some reason on the board here, I do think Dallas would consider him. I have 3 players who I'm going to be considering here for the Cowboys, and that is Matthew Golden, because they need more of a true outside receiver next to CeeDee Lamb. And it feels like, Texas connection. It feels like there is some vibes there. Jahdae Barron, another Texas guy, but Dallas's slot nickel corner right now is it Kaiir Elam? I don't know who they're going to play out there. So that's a big time question mark. Yes, pick 12 might be a little rich for a slot guy, but I think it could make some sense. Or I could go with the upside of Will Johnson, who, yes, 2024 wasn't his greatest year. Also has been dealing with some injuries lately, but the upside is there to be a true cornerback one. And if Dallas is potentially thinking about moving off of Trevon Diggs, I think Will Johnson very well could be the pick. Also did want to throw a shout out here to Kelvin Banks, who could play tackle, but I think Dallas is going to bank on Tyler Guyton, Cooper Beebe, Tyler Smith, and they'll have to just figure out that right guard spot, whether it is the guy they got in free agency or potentially Brock Hoffman. So in this situation, I think I'm going to go ahead and I think this could be a trade down spot, but I'll just take Matthew Golden here. I know the Cowboys are becoming a bit more popular for Matthew Golden to be the pick here. He just makes a lot of sense. I think he's probably the second best receiver if you consider Travis a corner, but if you consider Travis a receiver, then the third best receiver. Elite route runner, solid hands. Yes, he doesn't have great size. He's only about 5'11", maybe 6 foot with cleats on that, give him that extra boost. Down the stretch of the season was fantastic, became the number 1 option, surpassed Isaiah Bond, who, by the way, I believe it went to prison or something like that. Hopefully that gets figured out. But yeah, I'm going to go Matthew Golden here to help that receiving core that desperately needs a second option next to CeeDee Lamb. All right, the Miami Dolphins are on the board here, and this pick is incredibly easy for me. I'm just going to go ahead and take Kelvin Banks here. Teron Armstead just retired. That offensive line was already bad prior to him leaving. Kelvin Banks enters in there, probably starts day 1 at left tackle, but if you want to keep him at guard, he can also play guard. All right, the Indianapolis Colts are on the board here, and they probably were hoping that Tyler Warren would have fell to him at 14, and they were really close to doing so, but unfortunately, it did not work out that way. I still think tight end is very much in play here, and I'm going to be looking at Colston Loveland here to just give this offense for the Colts some sort of serious weapon. Some other players I will consider here will be Malachi Starks, Donovan Ezaraku, and maybe a linebacker, but there really isn't anybody. Well, Jahad Campbell I could also consider here. So there's a couple ways I could go. If this was up to me, I would probably take Jahad Campbell, because I love Jahad Campbell. He's I think my 4th or 5th highest ranked player on my big board, but I do understand that there's some injury concerns right now, and also positional value does come into play. It's because the tight end position for the Colts has been their biggest issue for years now, and people are very high on Colston Loveland because of how big, long, lengthy, 6'5", 245, and how he's just basically a big receiver, basically. I think he could very well become Anthony Richardson's go-to target, which it kind of feels like he has been desperately needing. So I guess we'll go Colston Loveland here to kind of shore up that tight end room and actually give them a legit body. All right, the Falcons are on the board at pick 15, and I do think that this is a spot where you almost have to go edge rusher. Yes, they've done some work to shore up that unit, but I still feel like there's a lot of work to be done here. And with the way the board fell, it's looking pretty nice here. Now, if it was up to me, I would probably take either Pierce or Ezaraku just because I like their pass rush ceiling. But I think the NFL is going to be higher on Michael and Shamar Stewart because of, number one, went to Georgia. A&M's a good program too. But they're big, physical, and just have incredibly high ceilings because of how long and lengthy they are. Right now, they don't really have pass rush plans, especially Shamar Stewart, who is just a complete moldable piece of clay. I think for the Falcons, they want something a little bit more proven. So I think they'll take Michael Williams, who is excellent against the run, moves very well for his size. I mean, he's a very big individual, 6'5", 265 with long arms. Only going to be 21 when the season starts, so Still has a lot of work to grow as a pass rusher, but I think there is a floor there that's very nice with a ceiling that's also very good. So I think the NFL will be higher on Michael more so than what appears to be a lot of NFL analysts. All right, 16, the Arizona Cardinals. With the way the board fell, I kind of think you have to take Will Johnson here. I mean, you could go Luther Burden to pair up with Marvin Harrison Jr., which would be fun, but I don't think that'll be the pick here. I also don't think an edge rusher is that big of a need right now, but maybe you want Kenneth Grant to be the understudy of Calais Campbell for a year, and then Kenneth Grant, will get playing time obviously this year, but become the full-time starter next year. That's also in play. But again, pretty deep defensive interior class, so I'll just take Will Johnson, who I think has the highest ceiling between him and Jahdae Barron, though I think Barron is better right now. Will Johnson's 2023 film, if healthy, man, it was dominant. So I'm going to take Will Johnson to hopefully become the cornerback one for the Arizona Cardinals. All right, 17, the Cincinnati Bengals, another team that probably needs to go somewhere on the defense. I will admit that offensive tackle or guard is also in play here, primarily a guy like Gray Zabel or Donovan Jackson. With that said, I don't see a world where you don't go defense here. And there's a lot of different ways I could go. I could go Jahdae Barron to give them an outside corner. I could go Malachi Starks to fix up that safety room that was really bad last year. I kind of think that was more scheme, more so than personnel, but we'll have to wait and see on that one. I could go Jahad Campbell, who I think fixes a lot of issues there, especially with one of their linebackers requesting a trade. We'll see if something does happen there. But I think I have to go pass rusher here. Like, they have been so desperately in need of another pass rusher with Trey Hendrickson. I blanked on his name there. But yeah, I think they kind of desperately could use that. And I just don't think Jace Pierce Jr. is their style of guy, nor do I think Donovan Ezaraku is. I'm very high on Nick Skeleton. I feel like there's a lot of negative press regarding him, but I think he's a lot better. He's 6'4". He's a little bit lighter than 285. I think he's probably back down to about 270, 260, which is where you really want him to be at. Texas A&M liked their defensive linemen very big, and last year I think his productivity took a step down because of it, whereas at Purdue he had 8 sacks, and looked just a lot cleaner out on the field. Like, he just moved a lot better, was able to finish up tackles a lot better. I'm tempted to go Nick Skorton here, who I know that PFF has ranked 33, but they haven't updated their edge rankings, at least now for Nick Skorton in a while, who I know the guys at PFF are a lot higher on than 33. I'm tempted to go Nick Skorton here because he just feels like he has the build that the Bengals are typically looking for. And yes, maybe you're still banking on Myles Murphy, but man, that's I mean, it's been what, 2-3 years now and he hasn't shown nothing. So I think I'm going to take Nick Skorton, who I think is a bit more of their style defensive lineman, bigger, rangier, a little longer, because Ezaraku and James Pierce are just so light. Like, they're on like 240 pounds. And then Shamar Stewart also very well could be their guy, but maybe they'll just want a bit more of a proven commodity. So I'll take Nick Skorton here for the Cincinnati Bengals there. At pick 18, the Seattle Seahawks are on the board here, and they have to find sort of a do-it-all offensive lineman. And I think that's Gray Zabel to a T. I love Gray Zabel, 6'6", 305, can play every single position on the field here. Seahawks offensive line could really use a versatile piece in that interior of the offensive line, and I just think Gray Zabel dresses it very well. Good mover, will fit their zone schemes, could also do some man stuff too, so I like the fit of Gray Zabel going to the Seattle Seahawks. This also does throw me a bit of a layup at pick 19 because Jahad Campbell's still on the board. The Buccaneers linebacker core was really weak last year. Levante David does come back, but he's only getting older. Jahad Campbell comes in there instantly, if healthy, and I think becomes one of their best players defensively. So I love the value here at pick 19. Just kind of happened to fall just because of 1 injury and 2 positional value. All right, pick 20, the Denver Broncos are on the board here, and I mean, they could kind of go wherever they want. I do think Amarian Hampton will likely be the pick because they really need a running back on this roster. But Luther Burden's also on the board here, not to mention Emeka Egbuka, who I think might be, I don't know, maybe a bit more of a Sean Payton guy than Luther Burden, but I could also see Luther Burden just being too good to pass up. This is tough because on one hand, they could be a team that says that we feel like we can get running back round 2 and be very happy with, Caleb, Quinshawn, Trevion, whoever might be available, and that we'll just end up taking a receiver and banking on a running back falling to us. I could also see a world where they just say, screw it, let's continue to build the best defense in the NFL by adding Malachi Starks or Jahdae Barron. Don't think they'll do that just because the defense is already stacked next year, and I think Bo Nix could use another weapon next to him or outside. So this is tough. In terms of what I think the Broncos will do, I think the Broncos will probably take receiver. And so then it comes down to Luther Burden or Emeka Egbuka. I'm personally higher on Emeka Egbuka. I'm also going to throw Jaden Higgins out there too, who I love. I'm not going to take him here just because they don't really need a long, lengthy receiver because they already have Cortland Sutton. But man, I mean, 6'4" Cortland Sutton, something like that, and 6'4" Jaden Higgins would be disgusting. But I think I'll take Emeka Egbuka here just because I think he's a bit more of a Sean Payton guy. And they don't really need speed. They already have speed out there on the field, which Luther Burden presents that. Instead, they'll focus on somebody who I think you're banking on playing in the slot, could also play a bit on the outside, incredibly smart, knows how to get open, create separation, reliable, and could be a go-to target for Bo Nix to just dump the ball off and feel really secure about. So I'll take Emeka Egbuka here to the Denver Broncos. If Colston Loveland was available, I would consider him, but they brought in Evan Ingram and Colston's off the board, so Emeka Egbuka just makes the most sense. All right, 21. Yes, the Steelers are looking like they're going to bring in Aaron Rodgers, but Shedeur Sanders falls right into their laps. They could go running back round 2. I also do think Malachi Starks is definitely in play here, but I don't see them passing up on Shedeur Sanders. He feels like he would be a good fit in Pittsburgh. There's some good players out there. He could play behind a younger offensive line that's still developing. So I'll take Shedeur Sanders here, even though PFF has him ranked 47th. I think he is definitely of value at pick 21, so I have no issue with the pick here. All right, the LA Chargers are on the board, and I think receiver is definitely in play. Unfortunately, tight end did not work out their way. I also think defensive line is low-key a massive need for this team. Like Khalil Mack, I believe, signed only a 1-year deal. And there are some really good pass rushers still available. I'm a huge fan of Braden Swinson. I think he'd be an awesome fit here. But you can go really any of these guys. I think they all make a level of sense. But do those guys overcome a guy like Luther Burden, who, by the way, I heard a report lately that the Chargers are potentially going to trade QJ, which I think is crazy. I would hold on to him for at least one more year and kind of wait it out. But if he is on the table here, I think Luther Burden could be available or could be an option. I also think Jaden Higgins too. Like, I think the NFL will be higher on Higgins than what some people might have him as. Like, he is my wide receiver 4, wide receiver 3 this year, above Luther Burden, just because I love the size of Higgins, the fact that he can run every single route on the board. And they already have Ladd McConkey, who plays a bit more in the slot. They kind of feel like they need a pure outside guy. I don't want to have my personal bias be thrown in here, but I would take Jaden Higgins. But what will the Chargers do, which is ultimately what this video is for? I think they'll probably stick with the trenches here. And I know Kenneth Grant might be an option here just because, of course, Michigan, Harbaugh, they need an interior defensive lineman. And this is tough. What will they do is where I need to put my mind. I don't think they're going to go Luther Burden. I think they'll probably wait on receiver. Tight end is also a need, but there's nobody available who I'm taking here. I don't love Elijah Arroyo, especially first round. I don't. So I guess I'll take Kenneth Grant, a disruptor up the middle with an incredibly high ceiling as both a run stuffer and with some level of juice as a pass rusher too. This defensive line for the Chargers could definitely use that. So we'll go with Kenneth Grant here. Hopefully I'm not making that pick just based purely off that Michigan logo. I don't think I am. All right, the Packers are on the board here, and Jahdae Barron fell right into their lap. So I don't think you overthink this one. Like, I think if this happens, this is arguably best case scenario for that secondary in Jahdae Barron. If Jahdae doesn't go here at 23, he'll probably go at 24 because the Vikings could very well use his versatility. But yeah, I'm going to take Jahdae Barron. Yes, Luther Burden's on the board here, but I think Jahdae Barron's the better talent. And I think he's arguably just as big of a need, even though receiver is also a big need for that Packers team. But I'm going to go Jahdae Barron here for the Packers you could put him wherever. Slot, outside. He could be your replacement for Jair. He could play alongside Jair. Just think it would make a lot of sense there at 23. 24, I think the drop ends for Malachi Starks. Harrison is only getting older, and the secondary lost some pieces in, Cameron Bynum and a few others. So I think you need to find replacements for those guys, and I think Malachi Starks, you can put him wherever. In the nickel, free safety, strong safety, wherever you need him to. Malachi Starks could fix those issues, and I think the Vikings will love his versatility and aggressiveness to create plays, so I'll take Malachi Starks there. All right, Houston is very interesting because they did shore up their offensive line in a number of ways, but I don't think that they are finished with offensive line help. Now, if Josh Simmons' injury was 100% cleared, like we knew today that he was going to be A-okay to play week 1 and be the same guy that he was prior to the injury. But I think Josh Simmons is probably taken somewhere like 15 to 20, maybe even higher than that, just because Simmons is incredible. Great technique, great mover. But at pick 25, the Houston Texans need a surefire hit. And sure, they could be a team that maybe says that we can wait on Josh Simmons to get healthy. But this is a Houston team that's trying to contend now. And I know that the Ohio State logo is tempting. I'm also looking at Donovan Jackson, who I think could play guard for this team, but also has flexibility to play tackle. I would also consider Luther Burden here. I think I'm ultimately going to go with Donovan Jackson. Even though I think Josh Simmons is the better player, I just think this Texans team needs to shore up that offensive line like immediately. And I think Simmons sticks at tackle. And so I think at the minimum, he's probably sitting or a rotation tackle to start his career, especially coming off the injury. Whereas Donovan Jackson can step in day one, play all 5 positions, and play them all at an elite level. So I'll take Donovan Jackson here to kind of shore up their offensive line a bit more. All right, the Rams are on the board at 26, and they've done a hell of a job this offseason with bringing in Devontae Adams. Admittedly speaking, I would love to take Luther Burden here just to say screw it. Let's have 3 unbelievable receiving options for Matthew Stafford to go with. And honestly, that could be their mindset. Like, hey, let's throw every single rock we can at this thing to try to win a championship, and Luther Burden could be one of those last pieces. I think cornerback, though, is a pretty big need for them. Also, linebacker is too. And Carson Schwessinger, if you really like Carson, who I do, I mean, he had what? How many tackles did he have last year? 100 tackles last year, an absolute tackling monster. Former walk-on, became a starter last year and now enters the draft. I feel like 26 was a little early for him, but the Rams are a team that they're not afraid to get a little frisky out there. Obviously, Braden Fisk, they took in the second round, and a lot of people had some question marks regarding him. I don't think they'll go Carson this round just because I think they could wait and maybe take a Kobe King or a Barrett Carter, maybe even Demetrius if he happens to be there in round 2. I kind of think that I'm going to go with a cornerback here. And of the options, I love Azariah Thomas. I also like Maxwell Hairston just because of how athletic he is and his ball hawking abilities. So I think I can kind of go either way of the cornerbacks on the board here. I guess I will take Maxwell just because there feels like there's a lot of hype for him to become potentially a first round pick. But I think I could honestly go any of these spots here. The board didn't fall very nice for the Rams. I could also go Josh Simmons to move out to right tackle in case Havenstein has another injury, but I think they'll take Maxwell Hairston here. So yeah, I'll take Maxwell. If you don't like Maxwell, by the way, I could envision like any one of these guys. Maybe besides Darian Porter, who I don't think goes first. And Benjamin Morrison's injury history is a little concerning with that hip thing, but I mean, if he's okay, he might be the pick here. But I'll go with Maxwell Hairston. And again, any of these guys all make sense. So I'll go Maxwell though. All right, at 27, I think this is where the fall of one of these pass rushers goes here. I almost think that this is a Ravens team that could kind of just go best player available in any of their somewhat positions of need. They need pass rush juice. They need a difference maker, especially with Kyle Van Noy just getting older and older and older. So Donovan Ezeraku makes a lot of sense. So does James Pierce Jr. I think it's a coin toss. For sake of argument, who I think will go higher at the NFL, I'll probably go James Pierce Jr., especially if that off the field stuff does kind of clear out, especially if the Baltimore Ravens feel like they can bring him into their culture and, be okay. So I'll take James Pierce Jr. here just because elite productivity at Tennessee, 8 sacks last year, 13 the year prior. Very good athleticism, moves nice. I mean, he was fantastic at the combine. So we'll take James Pierce Jr. here, who kind of feels like he can go anywhere on this board. All right, 28, the Detroit Lions are on the board here, and we all know what the Detroit Lions want to be. They want to be the more physical team every single night. And man, there are some pass rushers here that I frankly love. Braden Swinson, I think, could very well end up being the pick here. He feels like a Detroit Lion in terms of the size profile, how strong and physical he is, and his just willingness to just be an absolute force out there on the goal line, be a disruptor. With that said, it's a pretty deep edge rushing class, so I think they'll probably pass on him here, which is super unfortunate just because I absolutely love him. And I think he very well could be the pick here. But because I'm kind of yapping here, I think I'm going to just go ahead and take the offensive lineman here. They could use a guard. But man, there's not really any options here. Josh Simmons is a tackle. They don't need tackle. Josh Connolly, I also think, sticks at tackle. They wouldn't go Luther Burden. I mean, do I go Shamar Stewart for the upside and just say that this is a Lions team that could develop a pass rusher like Shamar? Very, very interesting stuff here. Derek Carman's also on the board here, but I think they need a bit more something off the edge, more so than in the interior. Also, Walter Nolan, who I am a huge fan of. I mean, just a classic disruptor if you need that. But they don't really need interior defensive linemen. I guess I'll go, they're not a team that's going to go with a lighter pass rusher like Donovan Ezeraku. That does not feel like their MO. I guess I'll go with Shamar Stewart, just for upside reasons. And this is a Lions team that feels like they could take on a guy who is as gifted physically and athletically as Shamar and turn him into something. Again, if it was me, I might consider Braden Swinson, but I'll go Shamar Stewart here. All right, 29 is the Washington Commanders, and with the way the board fell for him here, I think they have to go something off the edge. Like, they need a true disruptor. And even though this is not a team that typically does, or at least a coaching staff that has really went with these undersized defensive linemen, especially at the edge, just think Donovan Ezaraku is the best disruptor available on the board in terms of a pass rusher. So I'll go Donovan Ezaraku here and all 3 edge rushers back to back to back here to kind of get those guys off the board. I think it all makes sense for each spot there. All right, Buffalo probably would have loved to have Donovan Ezaraku or Shamar or James Pierce, but it didn't work their way. Doesn't matter, though, because the interior defensive line is also a big need for them. I love Walter Nolan. He would be higher ranked than Harmon and Alexander, but I just think that they might be a team that's looking for a more physical, bigger guy like Derek Harmon. Like Walter Nolan, I mean, he's balls to walls at all times. Also does give you some pass rush juice. But this is a Buffalo team that feels like they just need a bit more of a true run stuffer, a big boy. And I don't know if Walter Nolan is quite that yet. Like, he feels a little unpolished. I also could go Darius Alexander here, who's a little older, but 6'4", 310, has some legit juice. But I'll go Derek Harmon here, who feels like the NFL is a little bit higher on than a lot of other people. All right, the Chiefs at pick 31. Kind of feels like everyone just consistently has them taking tackle, like Josh Simmons or Josh Connerly. And I very well could end up doing it here as well. I kind of think this team could also just use a little bit of some juice on the defensive line. And edge rushers, probably not, but I'm kind of thinking Walter Nolan with Chris Jones. I mean, their next pass rusher or next player next to Chris Jones is Jerry Tillery, who I'm not that big of a believer in. And they did bring in Jalen Moore to play tackle. So I think I would go with Walter Nolan here. I'm going to take Walter Nolan to pair up with Chris Jones and just give some juice on the defensive line. I love Walter Nolan. 6'3", 305. Definitely has a lot of work to do in terms of just, like PFF says, becoming a more polished player. But man, this dude moves so well. His get off the ball sometimes is incredible. Physical as hell. Always looking to make the play. And I think that he'd be a fun fit with Chris Jones, especially if I believe there is some character concerns. Chris Jones would get that shirt up instantly, so I have no issue with this pick. And 32, surprisingly, some players still on the board here, like Amarian Hampton, who I thought might be off the board at pick 20, but couldn't really find a spot for him. Again, predictive mock drafts kind of end up being a little funky towards the end. As you can see, defensive line has been the last like 6 picks here. Kind of has worked out. I think that the Eagles are just at a spot where they can go best player available, and Luther Burden fell right into their laps, and he does feel a little bit of a need for them because AJ plays on the outside, Devontae Smith can move around in multiple spots, but Luther Burden steps in there and just finishes up what is going to be a trio of receivers that is unbelievable. Sure, they could go defensive line, but these last like 5 picks have kind of ate up all the players there. You could go safety or corner, but I think you could probably wait for round 2. You're going to have a hard time finding somebody better than Luther Burden at pick whatever their next pick is. So I'll take Luther Burden here to finish up that receiving core. And just AJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and Luther Burden. Yeah, good luck. So this is my predictive mock draft. You guys let me know in the comment section below what picks do you agree with and what picks do you disagree with. And of course, I'm not completely tapped in with every single team. So if you guys think that I predicted your team wrong, let me know. But if you enjoyed, subscribe. Love you guys. Peace.